So it's been a few days since Mauga has been out, playable, with this new season of Overwatch, and in that time, a lot of people have given a lot of varying opinions on him, whether he's too strong, too weak, whether he deserves to be buffed or nerfed, or if he just exists in this sort of gray area with a good spot to fit into within the tank role. As for me, I've seen a lot of these varying takes too, and I want to give one of my own maybe and sort of talk about what I think about Mauga. And to begin with that, I do want to talk about the buffs that he received when he was released. The first one that he got was that some of his health was replaced with armor, which was to help with damage reduction. He did have his headshot hitbox reduced, and he did get a damage reduction when using his overrun ability of 50%. And his final buff was that he had increased lifesteal on cardiac overdrive. So overall, it seemed like these buffs were used to help improve his mitigation, even in his free weekend stage. He did have pretty good damage, but it seemed to be the mitigation and survivability that was an issue, so those seemed to be pretty well taken care of. And that, with that buff, sort of leads to where we are now with Mauga. And this is where I give my sort of hot take, which I've seen a few times, so maybe it isn't super hot, but I want to say that Mauga isn't good. And I want you guys to stick with me here because it's very easy to see these big damage numbers that he's putting up in games. Like, for instance, I was playing the new game mode, the Battle of the Beast, and my friend put up 42,000 damage with Mauga. And on paper, that's a crazy number. Obviously, it wouldn't be the same in a quick play standard match of Overwatch, but it's still crazy numbers to be putting up, and that's very easy to see and look at and be like, oh my god, Mauga is insane. But it's a little deeper than the numbers, in my opinion. It's easy to give off this impression that he is really good. And for me, when you look closer at his ability to mitigate damage, especially look at that cardiac overdrive ability, it's not super good. And I know you guys are probably yelling at me like, oh my god, yes, it is that good, because we've all played against it. We've all seen him survive impossible things that no other character could match. But I think it's because we haven't quite learned how to play against him yet. Like I said, he's only been out for a few days, and we've all had this knee-jerk reaction of, oh my god, he does crazy damage, he lives forever, what are we going to do? And I'm sure he'll receive a nerf at some point to sort of balance out his survivability. But yeah, I think even now in its current state, it is somewhat manageable. So to begin, I've looked at a few of the tanks that I think can stop this. Primarily any tank with a shield. If you look at Ramatra, Sigma, even with his kinetic grasp ability too. You look at Winston with a weaker bubble, admittedly, but even it's still a shield, which could, in the right moment, be useful at stopping Mauga. And then we have Ryan, which, his classic big shield, which might be the biggest example of a tank that can stop Mauga. And this is all specifically during his lifesteal ability, where he is just regenerating health based upon the damage and crit damage that he does. So all these tanks, in my opinion, at least on paper, because I don't think in practice we've quite figured it out yet, but on paper, these tanks do a really good job at stopping that lifesteal ability. And even then, we have other tanks like D.Va and Orisa and Zarya who use their different abilities like Defense Matrix, Orisa's Javelin Spin, and Zarya's Bubbles to help prevent him from getting any of that lifesteal energy and life health back. And that really just leaves you with tanks like Hammond and Doomfist, who sort of have to rely on their mobility, which is like a huge part of their kit, to sort of evade Mauga during his lifesteal ability when that's active. And that sort of leaves Hog as sort of a hard counter to Mauga, which I think is cool. I think it's cool that Hog has that sort of hard counter where the hard counter sort of feasts upon his health and his form of damage mitigation. But regardless, I've presented a few tanks and their different ways of mitigating Mauga during his lifesteal. And now when Mauga is without that lifesteal, you're sort of left to wonder what Mauga is without having that sort of lifesteal ability. He still does have like his sort of charge, his overdrive, which is very good. He does get that knockdown effect if he does hit you, and it does deal a decent amount of damage. And it sets him up very well to deal more damage. But without that lifesteal, without that mitigation, what is Mauga? He is a massive target. I mean, he has a ginormous hitbox. I think we've all noticed that a lot of DPS and even tanks and supports have been able to sort of chip off on him just because he is such a big tank. But that's what he is. He's a target that will then become super reliant on his supports to keep him alive, just like he was in the previous, free weekend of his there. He didn't have these mitigation abilities. So with that, I think his entire kit is dependent on his lifesteal and on his survivability. And I think that's why such a hard counter to him like Ana with her biotic grenade and her ability to anti him is so huge, and we're seeing that she is such a good counter to him. And I think that shows, like, without that ability, he is very difficult to keep alive from a support's perspective if he's not able to sort of mitigate damage himself. So I think as time goes on, a lot of tank players and just Overwatch players in general become a lot better about learning how to play around his lifesteal ability, and that'll sort of be the moment where they go in and attack when they know it's on cooldown and they know that they have the upper hand, because he does deal very good damage, but if he can't stay alive and deal that damage over time, then he's sort of, like I said, he's just a big target. And that's also where you bring in someone like Zenyatta with the Discord Orb. You just throw that on him, and that big target box of his becomes even bigger, and he receives even more damage, which puts his supports under even more stress, and then the DPS are upset because they're not getting healed, and that sort of cycle where the team sort of breaks down sort of stems from that. So that's what I think. I think that if you can somehow manage to play around his lifesteal ability, which I will admit is easier said than done, especially when I'm doing all this theoretical work on paper and I'm not actively putting it into practice and showing you that, these are determined hard counters. I think that Mauga will be very good long term, and that this way of playing around his lifesteal won't make him obsolete or anything. But I think the better players, those that have a higher game sense and are more aware of cooldown abilities and calling that stuff out to their teammates, will have a lot easier of a time dealing with Mauga overall, and we'll just find it very easy to sort of shut him down. And that's why I sort of think this Mauga hype that he's receiving when people see these big numbers on scoreboards, it just points that he's not great. He's good. He's very good at dealing damage and being an imposing threat, and with incredible potential to deal damage and just become unstoppable. But I think it'll take a while, but tanks will have him figured out in the long run. Like I said, any tank with a shield, including Winston to a degree, will have their job sort of made a lot easier as to how to stop him. Like I said before, Diva, Orisa, and Zarya have their own mitigation abilities to sort of help withstand the lifesteal ability. Maybe you can make the argument that Mauga needs to have his damage tuned down a bit, especially in terms of his burning ability, because I've noticed a lot, both playing as him and against him, that once you're lit on fire, you do need to seek cover if you're not a tank, or if you don't have access to like a steady supply of healing. But regardless, Mauga's good, but he's not great. I think soon the player base will sort of come to that conclusion on their own, but until then, you can tell people that you said it first and you saw it here first.